Excited to be joined by our basketball analyst here at Illini Inquirer, Mike LaTulip, joining us. A big one in Knoxville over the weekend. Illinois falls just short. But Mike, first, I know you had a birthday earlier this month. Happy belated. I turned 33 today, so it's my Larry Bird year. A big day for me because, number one, I'm talking to Mike on the podcast, filling in for Jeremy. And number two, I turned another year older. So excited to be here.
Yeah, well, happy birthday, man. You just kind of dropped that bomb. That was like a unique pipe bomb there. No, man, it's when Jeremy told me that it would be you and I was like, all right, Jordan's out. We got Pippen and we got, I guess I'll be Horace Grant or something today. So we'll make do, but I'm excited, man.
Yeah, we'll be good. And it was a high level top 20 clash there in Knoxville, one that felt like Illinois had already done what they needed to make it a successful road swing by getting the Rutgers game, the FAU. Still had plenty to gain there if they would have beaten Tennessee. Tennessee, I thought, was probably going to be desperate and came in with a lot of energy, having lost their previous 3 high major games. The Vols prevail 86-79. Just kind of, I'll open the floor to you, just over general thoughts on that performance there by the Illini on Saturday.
Yeah, well, I think even bigger picture, just that the road trip in general with FAU and Rutgers. I think 3-0 felt like perfect world there. And they could have done it, to be honest. But 2-1 feels right. And I think you learned a lot from this game in Knoxville. One, reaffirming that you can compete against a high-level team like that in an environment where not a lot of teams go in there and win, even through SEC play. And but also schematically, I think they showed some things that you can build on in this week that you kind of have off. And they cross-matched to start the game. We'll dive into that a little bit more. And then also just the way that Illinois was navigating screens off the ball. They put them in some tough spots. And I thought in some ways they responded. In some ways it hurt them. But look, overall, again, with this decent layoff that you have, you can take what you learned and now you can tinker and make changes as you head into Colgate.
Yeah, Mike, I thought it was pretty encouraging. Number one, you're playing in front of 21,000. And like you said, I think they're 19-2 now against high major teams in that building over the last 2+ seasons. Your stars struggle in the first half, and yet you still find a way to be ahead. And then you're in it in the second half. It said to me, I think that it was a nice vote of confidence for the supporting cast and what they can be. And it feels like an upgrade building around Terrence versus last year. I know that's kind of a bigger picture thought, but I was encouraged by that.
Yeah, and I think the other encouraging part is the way that these other parts are getting their production. It doesn't feel like Quincy, to get to 22 points, has to dominate the ball or has to clear out and make that offense disjointed. I thought he for the most part took what the defense gave him, and some of those were inside out catch and shoot threes. When they started cross matching, Quincy's able to recognize, okay, I do on me. So if I have I do on me, we got Coleman Hawkins, and they were pretty much switching 1 through 4 with James guarding Hawkins. So Hawkins was getting a mismatch and going into the post, which I think they can do even more of. And when they entered it to Coleman, now you got this really good passer that they want to send 2 to the ball at. And Quincy was right there, ball side, and had a couple good kickouts. So that's when it felt like guys had, when it felt like the other parts last year had good games. Sometimes it felt like they really had to take control of the game to get that production. And I thought that wasn't the case with, Goody came in there and had some decent looks that were somewhat within the flow of the offense. And that's a sign of a good team where, again, everyone kind of knows who they are. And then you get those performances like a Quincy, like a Coleman, like a Luke hits a couple threes, and it doesn't feel like it's completely outside of what they're trying to do. So I thought that's really encouraging, and that's helpful for a guy like Terrence Shannon.
Yeah, there are a couple of different angles that we're going to break down here as far as both the positive and the negative. I'll start with one of the headlines. The refs kind of made themselves a story, and I know a lot of Illini fans talking about that. I want to get your thoughts on the difference, the way the game was called in the first half or the second half. 48 free throws in the second half. There's only 14 in the first half. Was the way when you went back and watched it, did it seem like there was a tighter whistle? Was the game just more physical and there were just more obvious fouls? How'd you look at that one?
I mean, I think that's why you got to err on the side of being the more aggressive and physical team regardless. Because if you're not, now you're either, now you're potentially fouling or you're taking bad shots or taking more threes. I thought it was just a matter of there were some bad calls, don't get me wrong, but that's not unique to going into an environment like that. And there were a couple calls even in the first half. It's interesting. I make this point probably every year, but no one ever leaves a game going, man, those refs, they were incredible. What a like TJ went off or something like that. But can we stop? What a well officiated game that like no one ever says that. So you notice the things when they're more like overt, I guess. And even in the first half, I thought, there were certain calls that I think went Illinois' way, and you see those throughout the game. But look, if you're Tennessee and you are getting into the paint more and you are forcing the refs to make calls more, you're probably going to get more calls. And Illinois took 36 threes. We'll get into that conversation, but that's why you have to continue to be aggressive downhill, put pressure on the rim, and then be physical defensively, because then it's like, if they're not going to call it, then now you're benefiting from being a little bit aggressive. And early in the game, Marcus Domask, it's like just goes to put the ball over his head and gets kind of hit in the face, but the ball popped out and wasn't strong with the ball. So you need to be aggressive from the beginning, and you can't rely on the refs. And that's always the second point I'll make, because Scott Nagy, my coach at for the 1 year I was at Wright State, always said, he's like, if you're complaining about the refs, you're typically getting your butt kicked. So the Quincy one was bad. That one was bad because it's so obvious, and I'm acknowledging that officiating is a tough thing to do. But when you see a shot go up, collision, shot go up, shot missed, foul, like you can't play the result. And I'm sure there's a human element of that, but you can't do that if you're an official.
If that ball gets wedged or just is still sitting on the rim, Terry Oglesby is still probably waiting over there in Knoxville to make that call.
He hasn't come home yet. Yeah, no question. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? Because you were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, how did it feel being there live?
I mean, it was hard to know. We didn't get the value of replays. Like I've been told, I still haven't seen the Ty Rodgers hook and hold. I know a lot of people said that was a bad call. I don't know. I hated that it felt like a smooth first half between the two, and it was obviously the offense is sparked early, and then it kind of bogged down a little bit. But I didn't think there was a ton of maybe egregious calls. And again, those watching on TV probably got the angles a little bit better than we did. But I hated that it turned into that free throw fest. But I did think that, and we'll talk more about it, Illinois settling for threes when they were in the bonus was really them taking themselves out of maybe getting some more free throws.
Yeah, no question. And look, I think going back to the Ty Rodgers hook and hold, I think they just got to take that call out of the game, because it's so hard to determine in that moment. You have two guys locking arms, and so who's the one pulling, who's the one trying to break away? It looks like, I don't know how Ty would have benefited from hooking and holding and simultaneously trying to run towards the ball. Like, wouldn't you
Right.
think that, like, why would you want to bring your guy with you? That doesn't make sense to me. So I think it's just that they implemented that maybe 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago. I don't think it was around when I was playing, and it's just one of those, you probably got to, whether it's like the NCAA offices in Indianapolis, just have a sit down and be like, what are we really getting from this particular call? Because it feels like every single time, if everyone disagrees with the call pretty much every single time, it's, then you probably got to take it out of the game. So I don't know. I guess I'll be curious to see what they do with that.
Let's move on to a couple of other different angles. The Illinois obviously would have wished went differently. Terrence Shannon, Marcus Domask, 33 apiece against FAU in the Garden. They respond 27 of 27 combined for those two. It was a tough game for both of them. Obviously, I mean, it's a really elite defense. Tennessee, one of the top defenses of the country. We saw how physical they were in the lane against Terrence, and just having athleticism to make things difficult for him to get to the rim. What did you see as far as what made it hard for Terrence to get going? And then Marcus also a big difference in his performance.
Yeah, I'll start with Terrence. I think Terrence can continue to try to harness his aggression and power and speed in ways that can benefit him. I think he's taken a step even from last year. on just the situational stuff. And I think the game has slowed down for him more as a ball handler to where he can make certain reads. But that next step is not just making the reads that are, who's open and how can I deliver? It's what's the matchup and who's guarding me and what is the best outcome for us with this particular matchup. So at times Adu got switched onto him, and there were 2 times he settled for threes. And that just like for him, that can't happen. And I used to say this with Kofi, 2 completely different players, but with Kofi, it's every offseason's like, is he going to step out to 15 feet? And it's don't get bored with consistency, man. Like, don't get bored with it. He's going to get the ball enough, and he's going to get enough with Ty Rodgers and the guys that he has around him. He'll get enough catch and shoot looks. There's times he's going to have to dance late clock and shoot threes. He's going to get 6, 7 threes per game. But those are the ones where if you're Terrence, you're like, okay, big 7'1" guy switched on to me. I got to go. Like this every single time. It's got to be automatic. I have to go to the rim because, again, it's not even just, hey, finish over the 7'1" guy. Hand checks, rotation. Now you're able to put yourself in a better position to deliver those passes. So that's Terrence. And those are things that even as a guy that can be a first-team All-American this year, he can still make strides in. And then Damask, I think not every team is going to let you just back down. And they're definitely trying to implement more post up, long post type stuff with him. But I thought this was a really, really interesting matchup because, yes, they want to post more, but now you have a guy like Ziegler who a lot of times, and it sounds counterintuitive, the 5'9" scrappy little guys are the toughest to post sometimes. They have a lower center of gravity. And a lot of times, too, there's guys that are bigger and I say this as a guy that I took charges on the ball. That's how I survived defensively. And guys are like weary of that because you put one brace or like lowering the shoulder, like those guys are going down. Now you have a foul. So instead of, hey, I'm posting Ziegler, that's not the guy to get the ball at 18, 17 feet and try to back down. That's a low post touch. That's with a smaller guy. Smaller guy is low post. Bigger guy is long post. Like that's a high post, long post touch to where now you can square up. Now you can square up at 17, 18 feet and use your speed and use your pivots. You get Ziegler or you get any of these guys. I'm trying to think around the league. Jameer Young, Boo Booey, those type of guys. That has to be a deep cut, that touch. It just has to be. And I think those are things that out of this game you go, FAU had guys that they could kind of back down. You get some of these other tough guards, that's got to be a lower touch. So that's something for Damas that I think he can for sure work on. He missed shots, but I thought again he was good defensively.
That's a great point as far as the posting up. I did want to maybe zoom out a little bit because one of the criticisms, I guess, or just one of the critiques of Illinois after the FAU game, and I'll just say it, I was listening to the Field of 68 and Jeff Goodman, Rob Dosser talking, well, is Marcus Damas going to be a guy that can rely on for 30-plus in another game this year? I don't worry about Marcus coming out of this game. I think most nights obviously it's going to be in between the 2 performances between Tennessee, FAU. Like he scores 15 at Rutgers, and I feel like that was something you can probably rely on him in most games. I do still believe he should be your number 2 scoring option. I'm curious your thoughts on that. And if not that I don't feel like you believe that Marcus at the Garden was fluky or that his emergence is fluky by any means, but what do you think on that?
No, it wasn't fluky, but you certainly can't expect that.
Right.
Now, I've said over and over again that the aggression and him being a threat, that has to be consistent every game. Whether or not the production reflects that is kind of a moot point because he's much more likely to be in that 15-ish range than he may not score 30-plus the rest of the season. I'd actually be surprised if he did. Now, again, it's matchups and it's this and it's that, but he has to figure out a way because you can see it's like visible with him where he looks timid and then FAU he's like ice in the veins and like Jordan shoulder shrug, just continuing to believe in himself. You can hear it from his teammates; they believe in him, but he has to figure that out because he's going to have to be as the season goes on that second option. Because now if Quincy comes along, maybe you don't want Quincy as your second option. Maybe you don't want Coleman as like your second scoring option, but Quincy is like a fourth scoring option for you. That's damn good. A guy that is capable as your fourth scoring option to put up 20 plus. I mean, you go down the list, there are probably how many guys on this team that are genuinely capable of putting up 20 plus. I'd put Terrence in that category. Damascus in that category. Quincy did it. Depending on the matchup and potentially opponent, Dane can do it. Dane's proven to do that. Coleman, he's done it before, but that's kind of always been synonymous with getting hot from three. So, you're talking about 5-ish guys that can get you 20 on a given night. How they get it's important, but for Marcus, every single night has to be, I got to view myself that way. Like I have to. That helps Terrence, that helps Coleman, that helps Quincy, that helps your offense in general, and he'll figure that out. You'd think that just after the Rutgers and Marquette and the Garden that it would just be ingrained, but it's a progression with these guys, and he's just got to be more consistent with that.
Is there a game where Luke Goody hits 6 threes and maybe he gets to 20 at some point?
Totally possible. Yeah, I mean, throw him as a sixth guy, no question.
Yeah. Let's talk about the threes. So Illinois goes 9 for 36 from three. As you look back into the formula of success against Rutgers, and look, I know that matchups are different. Sometimes tempo dictates more shots, so the volumes can vary. But Rutgers, I think they took 20 or 21 threes, kind of in that same range against FAU as well. And really post-Marquette, Illinois done a good job of getting more inside the arc, more to the paint, at 48 points in the paint against FAU. Tennessee, with their athleticism, physicality inside, that's part of it. Them crashing in. I mean, Mike, I'm sure we're going to see it on the film room when we do it. There's 4 guys in the paint waiting for Terrence sometimes. So that can make it tough to get to the rim. But Illinois felt like they settled for threes at moments in the game. 36, I feel like it's a dumb question to ask you, is it too many? But by how much is it too many? And what do you kind of think overall about the volume of threes?
Well, I charted them. So let's talk about, and it's really 4 different categories: good shot, okay shot, bad shot, shot clock. I kind of put them into 4 different buckets. And the criteria on that is really 3 things for what constitutes a good, okay, bad shot. Is it in rhythm? What's the time and situation? And do I have offensive rebounding position? And if you check all 3 of those boxes, you could check all 3 of those boxes 35 times in a game, and those are good shots. Now, if it's 2 of the 3 boxes, could still be a good shot, right? If it's like in rhythm and you have rebounding position, but the time and situation isn't ideal, yeah, that's when you start teetering on good/okay. So they took 36 in the game. 19 were good. Like, all pretty much checked all 3 of those boxes: rebounding position, in rhythm, time and situation. And if you want to add a 4th one, got a paint touch, or there was some inside out element to it. There were 7 that were bad. And what are bad ones? Man, like one of our first possessions of the second half, hit ahead to Coleman Hawkins, like pulls from 29 feet, no rebounding position. Okay, maybe it's in rhythm, but time and situation, that's a bad one. And then there were the other ones where you start teetering on okay, where there's no paint touch, but when Terrence Shannon drives with his right hand, Ziegler helps in, and now you get a drive and kick. It wasn't necessarily like a penetrating drive. It was more east-west, but it's a drive and kick to Damascus, and Damascus just catches and shoots it. I put that in the okay category because it was early in the shot clock. There was no paint touch. So, but there were 19 like good ones. And, probably out of the 9 threes that they made, I'd say 7 of those 19 that they took, they made. So how can you shave that down? And this is the broader point that I'll make as well, is just like golf, you don't want to go up there with a million swing thoughts. So I'm making this point: in rhythm, time and situation, do I have rebounding position? Those are not things that you are processing in the moment as a player. That's like so counterintuitive to shooting. Like, no one is catching the ball, looking at the rim going, what's our offensive rebounding position? Oh my, was this in rhythm? What's the time? And like, you cannot do that. You have to be free of mind and shoot. So what does that revert back to? It's what type of offense are you generating? Because the offense you generate will eventually lead to those good ones, and where you don't have to think about it. So, well, again, I do it in film. Like, part of the film is, hey, class, good one, bad one, okay one, why? And we'll walk through that, because it's so easy to look at a number at the end of the game. And the broader point that I'll make too, the difference between Rutgers and Tennessee, both really good defenses. Tennessee's an even better defense. So at some point, like, if they're going to pack the paint that much, you're going to have to make them pay. And then the last point that I'll make too is, again, this goes back to Terrence and just the recognition, where first offensive possession of the game for them is a Terrence left wing three. They cross-matched. They got a switch. Ziegler is late. He's trying to help on Coleman Hawkins. Skip to Ty Rodgers, one more to Terrence. Ziegler is sprinting out. If you're Terrence, all right, I put in the okay bucket, because it was catch and shoot. It was in rhythm. They had rebounding position. But, man, situation, long closeout. Can I just attack those feet? I'm Terrence Shannon. Like that. Those are the ones that I think you can eliminate the bad ones. You're going to have okay ones. Like, not everyone is going to be good or great throughout the game, but that puts you at 25 threes that were either good, great, or okay. And that's fine. I think that's totally fine for this team. And then again, late, you factor in, you're chasing, you're down 12, 10, guys are going to start chucking. So that's where a couple of those bad ones came in. But that was a long-winded way, and I apologize, of just kind of how I am breaking that down.
Oh, that was good. As far as a bit of a spinoff there, like, it reminded me a little bit the way that Tennessee made it hard on Terrence and kind of bottled him up, of Baylor against Io that year at Indy. Just there aren't many teams that can do that to that high level of a guard, and maybe Illinois doesn't run into that. We'll see the rest of this season. Obviously, there are some really elite defensive teams out there, like a Houston typically has and whatnot. But if Terrence has a tough time getting there, what else does Illinois have to do to make sure you're not just stagnant on the perimeter shooting threes?
Well, I think there's ways that you can, get him in actions where, and they try to do this, obviously, getting him downhill to his left hand. They're running some of that roll replace action where the throwback is to him to a single side, ripping with his left hand. But I still think there's room for a guy like Terrence Shannon, who's good at drawing contact, good at getting to the foul line. There are really two things. One, I think just like Damas, that you can post Terrence a little more, especially if they're going to switch 1 through 4 and cross match and stuff. I think there's ways that you can get him going. And then the second part is what I talked about with Terrence. Okay, if they want to switch and they're cross matching and I get a 4-man or a 5-man, yes, it may be easier to dance on him and cross him to free yourself up. But that's the perfect time where when you free yourself up a little bit from 3, now they feel like they got to overcommit to recover. And then it's has he get downhill, and now things really open up. So it's a patience thing with Terrence. If you keep just try to like same speed ram, that's why, like in football, right? There's misdirection. There's like Le'Veon Bell wasn't just hand the ball off and just run through the tackles. He would kind of wait and then use the change of speed and pace and burst to his advantage. So those are the two things that I think you can do for Terrence. And then just throughout the game, it's on Terrence to say, hey, how involved can I get on the defensive rebounding side of things? Because I found maybe 3 or 4 times in the game where he completely gets himself in no man's land, like completely. And it's interesting because when he's guarding Dalton Connect, he's like super dialed in. When the guys that aren't Dalton Connect, he kind of starts drifting at the 3-point line and won't offer help on the defensive glass and is kind of waiting for like an outlet. But dude, if you go in and get that yourself, now you're gone. You don't even have to wait for an outlet or a pass. And a lot of times it's against those guys that are more of those scrappy 45. The guy for Tennessee came in and just made an impact on the offensive glass. And sometimes it was when Terrence was guarding him. So those are really 3 areas for Terrence. But it's not just going to be like scheming up stuff. It's little recognition stuff from Terrence. And it's probably even more effort on the defensive glass to try to get himself more of those jailbreaks.
I want to move on to defense here in a second. Before we do, I want to ask you, because I think fans are thinking it. I admittedly had it cross my mind. Was this one of those not having a point guard games where it really kind of reared its head? Because Terrence, a lot of times, is a guy that is the one consistent we know he's going to get in the lane for Illinois. Sometimes it feels like he can be the only guy, or at least the only guy that does it consistently. I'm not saying that, hey, if Nico Moretti was healthy for this game, Illinois is going to win, but was that something that you looked at? Because Ty seemed rather non-existent offensively. He got to the line a couple of times. Not to put it all on him, it's just we know that point guards, a lot of times their greatest skill is they can get to where they want to go off the dribble.
Yeah, I think you always have to factor in not every team is built the same. And I think I talked about this with Jeremy before, but you're always pulling different levers. And it's almost like when you have like sliders on NBA 2K, or when you're building a player, it's the same thing with a team where it's like, hey, we may be 94 in this level, but point guard, we may be 78. There's other teams that are 78 with point guard that are 72 on defense, 69 on the offensive glass. And Illinois, like, you can at least pull different levers to where you're good in these other areas, to where you don't have to be in that 90th percentile with point guard play. But the other point that I'll mention is, look, this game was tempo wise and possession wise. You had more possessions in this game than you did FAU and Marquette. I mean, you had 172 possessions in this game, 86 on both sides. And the 86 possessions you had, you turned the ball over 9 times. So,
yeah,
completely different conversation if it's like, hey, you turned it over 21 times, you can't get into stuff. These guys are capable enough ball handlers. Now, there's times where it's very obvious when Damask is getting pressured by a guy like Ziegler and he just kind of takes the ball from him. That can happen. But, like, what is the makeup of your team beyond that? Because I think this team has Final Four aspirations. And look, it's not impossible for a team without a true point guard to make it to the Final Four. I could think of 3 teams over the years that have done it. I mean, South Carolina back in 2017, their main guy was Sindarius Thornwell. It's kind of similar to Terrence Shannon, where it's like bruiser, get downhill, put you in jail. Great defensive team. This Illinois team's even more capable than that team was offensively. They had Chris Silva, they had PJ Dozier. They were more like wing big oriented. Dwayne Notice was their point guard, but no one on that team averaged over 3 assists per game, and they did everything through, defense and rebounding. But I think Illinois can do that defensively and be an even better offensive team because of the talent and skill that they have. And then think about like San Diego State last year. I mean, that they were inept a little bit offensively too, and even their point guard Trammell was like okay, like he was just okay. They did it again with wings and bigs. And then probably another team that I'll mention is probably 2016 Syracuse or 2015 Syracuse, where you go like Trevor Cooney, Mike Benajay, Malachi Richardson, Tyler Lydon, Roberson, like that whole team was 6'5" and above. Granted, they ran that zone, but none of those guys were a point guard. So it's not impossible. You just need to be really good in those other areas like those teams were. And I think Illinois can be that. So I'm not really I was probably more worried earlier in the year, but now that you've seen them play against high-level competition, like turnovers aren't really an issue. I don't care what you say. If you go into an environment like that and turn over 9 times and have 86 offensive possessions, I don't know. That's pretty impressive.
No, yeah, I definitely agree with that. As far as the defensive side, I think one thing I wondered that I knew that we were going to learn in that 3-game sample size away from home is Illinois at the time was top 10 in the country defensive efficiency. Would they prove to be elite as they got challenged a little bit more? They obviously held down Rutgers really well, less than 60 points in that game. FAU, I mean, you got to tip your cap to them. They're really talented offensively, but they score 89. Tennessee scores 86 and puts up darn near 1.3 points per possession. I know that the free throw volume plays into that as well. So I kind of wanted to get your updated feel. I mean, it's not like Illinois has completely tanked in DER rankings. You go to KenPom, they're 14th still in adjusted defensive efficiency. So I don't want to say they were frauds there, but is there something that you saw in the last 2 games that they're not doing defensively that's caused them problems, and kind of the updated feel on just how good this team is defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think in higher possession games, that's even more so. It's even more of a reason to lock in defensively, and you got to factor in fatigue too. I mean,
Right.
This is a team right now that outside of maybe Luke Goody and Dane Danger and a little bit of Justin Harmon and like a sprinkle of Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, there aren't a ton of guys outside of this starting lineup that are playing like heavy minutes. So if you're going to be this high possession team, do you pull some of those other levers with your rotation to try to keep guys fresh? Because I think that's where I've seen some of the drop off is, man, like these games turn into somewhat of a track meet. And now you got to be almost even more conscious of your shot selection. Because if you're like, I mentioned those 7 bad threes that you took, now it's not going to be perfect every game. Can you make that 3 or 4? Because that's 3 or 4 opportunities on misses that are basically like turnovers in a way, the way they come off the rim and kind of lead to jailbreaks for these opposing teams. But again, you make the point, 89 points against FAU, 86 against Tennessee. You can't look at the points. You have to look at the points per possession like you're talking about. That's a number, even when I was in college, that's what we looked at when it came to how we grade ourselves out on the defensive end. And that's what the metrics like Ken Palm look at as well. But you're playing higher possession games than you did last year. That's just a fact. And it's because you're capable of it, but now you don't want to have drop off on that end. So if you can get under 1 point per possession, I want to say Tennessee was right at 1. I think it was 86 possessions, 86 points. I could be reading that wrong, but that's not horrible when it comes to like going on the road in that environment. And honestly, it's a Tennessee team that, different than the ones from the past, they played at a quicker tempo. They were like 260 last year, and I think they were top 25 this year. And that might have gone up after last game. So all comes down to pace, all comes down to the points per possession, but you have to find a way to not be fatigued and fight through that exhaustion that you have when you're going up and down on both ends.
Mike, let's go to the positive side of this thing. And when you compete like that, you have a halftime lead on the road against Tennessee. Obviously, some things have to go right for you. Quincy Gerber in particular, the start of that game, knocking down some big threes. Tennessee seemed to be okay with him taking those looks. And I know that his season stats maybe dictated that, all right, we'll give him a few, but he really stepped up and made some big shots. Even I like the fact that he got to the free throw line too, a guy that can drive a closeout and get into there and get to the line. So 22 points for him. What'd you see and what he put on display on Saturday?
Yeah, I think even through his struggles, I've really enjoyed his presence and his body language. That's never wavered for him. And that sets you up to be able to do what he does in that moment. If you're a guy that internalizes your poor shooting performances and make it about yourself, it's really hard to go into an environment like that and put up 22 points and be pretty efficient and then hold your own on the defensive end. So I'm curious moving forward if teams continue to cross match, if they feel like they can pull it off and put the 4-man on Coleman Hawkins and the 5-man on Quincy. And if that's the case, he's got to really pick his spots. I think him being a guy that as he spaces on the perimeter, that's a great chance when guys drive. Bigs just aren't as locked into perimeter defensive principles. So they help in off the ball, or they help in same side corner. And those are opportunities for Quincy to say, hey, do I have it going from 3? Great, catch and shoot look. If not, straight line drive. And he's done a great job of that. So these type of games should give you confidence, but and that should bode well for him moving forward.
Coleman Hawkins, I felt like, took a step forward offensively. The last 2 games, you look at the very end of FAU to be able to have the confidence and step up in the clutch and hit that big 3. And then against Tennessee, I know that some threes late kind of maybe muddied up his stat line a little bit, but and he was, 4 for 13 from the field, 3 for 10 from 3, but had 4 assists. I like some of his off the bounce driving kick, which set up Terrence for one of his threes in that game. But the ability to make some shots, and it just seemed like Coleman's confidence is coming back a little bit with his jumper to the point where he's jawing with the crowd a little bit. That seems like vintage Coleman Hawkins. But how big is that to get him going a little bit more as that shooting threat, or just a guy that feels more in rhythm offensively?
Yeah, well, it's huge. And I think 4 for 13 for a guy like Coleman just shouldn't really happen. I know he doesn't get a ton around the rim, but I still think that 3 for 10 should probably be 3 for 8-ish.
Yeah.
One early in the second half where he just hoisted wasn't a good one. And then I think there's other opportunities too. Some of these passes aren't perfect. There were two for Coleman in particular where he kind of caught it at his ankles or caught it like off to the side. And those are just times where if you feel like you still have time, give yourself a rhythm dribble and go. It's really hard to like bend down and then get into like a catch and shoot. So little things that he can be mindful of moving forward. But do you feature him more? And when I say that, hold on, I'm not saying run the offense through him. I'm saying that if you're going to do these cross matches, if teams are going to cross match and switch, can he, and he was doing it, getting into the post, can you feed him more? Because he's a small on him, now you're really unlocking his passing ability if they send two. Now, like the hook over the head, cross court stuff, he can probably just make the simpler one. But he had a couple where he got it in the post, they sent a second one, ball side, Quincy three. He's really good at that. And then also, I mean, look over the years, he's been great around the rim. I think last year he was 58 of 81 around the rim, which is good. I think it's 72%. And then he's 8 for 12 this year, which isn't bad at all. And then even on his hook shot, when he gets to that left shoulder, he's 17 for 31 over the past 2 years, which is like 90th percentile stuff. So do you find more ways to play through him in the post? Because I think he can do that. And then are there other ways too to maybe with these other post threats that you have, keep it in the middle third of the floor where help is tougher to come and make him a passer out of the high-low where he finds guys like Damask. Maybe it's like a whip cut where you come through and then just whip across your man and post with Damask, Shannon, Rogers. There's other ways to go about that. And that's what excites you about a guy like Coleman, because you can put him in different spots.
On the note of playing through the post, Mike, I know a lot of people wondered, Dane Danger, 4 minutes in this game against Tennessee, with Illinois struggling to get the ball inside or be productive inside, would have been better to play Dane a little bit more. I know we've talked about, and you and Jeremy have talked about on podcasts about just overall what's his role, what does the future look like in terms of the rest of this season with Dane. Like I mentioned, 4 minutes in this one, and really if you look at the 4 games against top 100 opponents between Marquette, Rutgers, FAU, and this one, he's averaged about 7 minutes a game. So how do you see that? Do you think that that's okay to go with in terms of a usage for him? And how would you approach it with Dane?
Well, I think you always have to ask yourself the question, right? Everybody, there's a bench guy every year that people are clamoring to have go into the game. For who? That's the question. If you could play with 6, you play with 6, but it's not Terrence Shannon. It's probably not Marcus Damask. It definitely wasn't Quincy last game. I mean, I don't know how you could have taken him off the floor in those moments. I think Ty does so much for you just in terms of being low maintenance. He's a great defender, and then also he can get downhill and he delivered some great passes, one to Harmon, one to Goody for a 3. He can do those things. So, and then Coleman, the advantage you have is with Coleman at the 5. So I don't know. I really don't have an answer for that, because maybe there's some ways to sprinkle it in where you feel like you can slow things down a little bit and work it into the post. You're going to sacrifice having a higher possession game. I mean, that keeps you more fresh on the defensive end. But always with Dane, there's going to be just a cap there with this free throw shooting and some of the turnover stuff when he does get the ball in the post. So like if he's going to play, he's got to be damn good defensively. That's his ticket. If he comes in and he's disruptive and drop coverage, and that's going to earn him more playing time. But if that's not the case, then it's going to be really hard to bake those minutes in.
Will there be a situation where you'd play Coleman at the 4 and Dane at the 5 like you did last year? I know I agree with you. Like you said, I think the biggest value of Coleman is just playing him at the 5. And I like what obviously Quincy's doing at the 4. I think it's a good compliment, the physicality of him at the 4, and obviously the stretch nature of Coleman at the 5. Would you see any motivation to try to mix that in? Or not to say that there's a lot of, like you said, you got to find a guy to take off the floor to get Dane out there. But how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, they've tried this over the years, and that's not to say that they won't go to it depending on the game, right? If they feel like they met, like, man, our whether it's a big that they feel like they can expose, and hey, maybe this is more of a Dane game. I mean, 3 out of these 4 games that you've played have been track meets, and that's not going to be the type of game for Dane. And then I think against Rutgers, he got 2 fouls in the first half, which took him out. So maybe there was more of a plan for him in that type of game. But again, when we talk about cross matching like Tennessee did, if teams are watching that and saying, hey, this is kind of what we want to do to Illinois, then you take out the advantage you have when teams cross match if you put Dane at the 5, because now Adu is just going to guard Dane, and then they're going to have James guarding Hawkins, and now it's like, well, okay, well, what's our advantage now? Whereas when it's Quincy being guarded by a 5, now he can space a little bit. You're pulling a 5 out to the perimeter. That's where that advantage is. So I don't know. I mean, maybe Colgate may be a game, maybe a Dane game, where you just want to establish a true post presence inside, and you do that. But that's not something we haven't seen from Dane against mid-major competition, and then against some Big Ten competition where we feel like, hey, maybe it's Iowa, right? Last year he started against Iowa, got off to a great start, rolling to the rim, rolling hard, establishing himself in the paint. So that's the beauty of it, is that you can play in different ways, and different matchups call for different rotations and schemes. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see how they handle that as the season goes on.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Dane's got to play better to make that a motivation for Brad to really go out there and make him want to play him more. Like turnovers, I think definitely the over dribbling against Rutgers was frustrating. There is an obvious difference between Coleman playing the 5, the area he can cover, how well he plays in that, versus Dane sometimes in the drop. And kind of the last point I'll make, I guess, is that when Dane's out there, that's a more clogged lane for Terrence Shannon to go in there, especially if Ty's on the court and Dane. Floor spacing is hard to come by.
Yeah, and you make a really good point, because everybody loves the 5 out stuff. And I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but 5 out without movement and cutting is the worst offense possible, because you just brought a 5th perimeter defender into the gaps. So it becomes even, yes, the paint is open, but you still have to get to the paint. And now teams like that is so hard to breach. And when you actually have 4 out 1 in, if you have a post player that can really occupy a 5-man defensively, now you only have 4 perimeter defenders. So there's a little bit more gaps to drive, but you still have to have movement, maybe flare screens away to occupy those defenders to be able to drive those lanes. And then you trust a Damask, a Shannon, a Rogers because of their size, to where if a big man wants to help over and contest, you can finish over them. Or if they want to help over and contest, you got offensive rebounding position. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with it, but spacing is critical for sure.
All right, Mike, before we finish up here, looking ahead to this weekend, they'll play Colgate. Got some time off before we dive into that matchup. I just want to ask you, as a player that's gone through it, how do coaches usually approach a finals week with game prep, practice? What goes into that for a player as they're going through that?
Yeah, I think because you had a game on Saturday, odds are, and this would be really the structure of it, Sunday is come in and get treatment, maybe get up some shots. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, you're practicing, but it's about us. What did we learn from Tennessee? What do we want to tinker? What do we want to change? You're not even touching Colgate. Everyone's got the prep. The coaches do a great job of getting that together, but like Colgate's not on your mind yet. And then on Wednesday, it's treatment, day off, get shots, and then you have probably a 2-day, maybe a 3-day prep, and you've turned your focus to Colgate. You're still working on yourself a little bit, but those last couple days leading up to the game are scout team, what's Colgate running, and they run great actions. What they do defensively, that's when you're starting to bake that in. So it's splitting up your week into primarily about us, and then still about us, but mixing in some Colgate. So that's really how the structure is. And then once you start getting into the true Christmas break, you're spending a lot of time in that facility. And I know, Underwood's been one to do 2-a-days. We did 2-a-days when we were there. And then you break up those practices accordingly. Maybe it's more skill work, the first one, and a true practice, the second one, or vice versa. But you get creative with it, and you want to take out some of the monotony, but that's typically how it's structured.
In terms of the Colgate game itself, to finish up here, I know that it's been circled as maybe a potential trap game coming off of finals week because you had FAU Tennessee before that. And this is a Colgate team that has given some, Syracuse its troubles in the recent years. They almost beat them 3 years in a row. They blew a big lead there at the Carrier Dome earlier this season. They've been to the tournament. They're a team that traditionally shoots the 3 really well. I know percentage-wise they're down a little bit this year. They had been 3 straight seasons, 40+% from three. I think they're down like 35, 36. But from what you've gathered on them, what do you think of this matchup for Illinois and just the game in general?
Yeah, I mean, look at the bookends of this game. You get hard-fought game in Tennessee, and then you have bragging rights. So can you stay focused in this game and go out there? I mean, Colgate, they are much slower than some of these other teams that you've played. But you look at yes, they were up 24 on Syracuse, and they were able to, to come to Syracuse came back and won that game. But they played against Arizona, and Arizona just beat the brakes off of them. Arizona didn't give up a single offensive rebound. This is not a great rebounding team in Colgate. Now they run really good stuff. They can shoot it. So you always want to be aware of that. But Arizona was able to pressure them into 18 turnovers and then they shared the ball themselves. I mean, I think Arizona had 21 assists in that game and got 14 offensive rebounds, got those back at the line. And so that has to be, they don't have a ton of guys, Colgate, who just kind of get into the paint and live in the paint all game. So you have to be able to be solid. And I think it's a game that does kind of work in Illinois' favor with how they're structured and what they like to do. So, but you need to still go out there and do it. So if I'm Illinois, man, what are our principles? Can we get back to that after these couple track meets? Defense and rebounding. If you take care of those two areas, you take care of this game.
Mike, great stuff as always. We'll have to convince Jeremy to go on another mini vacation. We can do another one of these, but I enjoyed it, man, and great stuff.
Yeah, man. Well, I want to turn the tables too, and I want to be the one interviewing you. I definitely have questions about just your insight on recruiting, and now that the portal and NIL is coming to play, you're the one that's kind of boots on the ground for that. So next time we hop on, I definitely want to dive into that.
Sounds like a plan. I look forward to the filmer we're going to do with you. But until next time on the pod, Mike, thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.